you today on CoSA's behalf. We'll be starting the webinar momentarily. I want to take a few moments to remind you of housekeeping items before the webinar begins. Our presenter, Chris Barth, will offer opportunities for you to interact during today's presentation, and he will give you information about that during the presentation. Otherwise, please use the chat box there on the right of your screen for questions or communications during the webinar today. Our CoSA staff, including IT Coordinator Becky Jolson and me, will be monitoring the chat box during the webinar. And as I said at the end, we'll use that for questions and comments. Since it's just a little bit after the top of the hour, we are going to begin our webinar program. I want to introduce our moderator for today's webinar. State Archivist Shelley Thompson from South Dakota will be moderating this Leadership and Management webinar today. Shelley, thanks for being our moderator today. So with that, I'm going to turn that over to you.
Hello, this is Shelley. Can everybody hear me? I'd like to move to the next, I believe, to the next slide. Welcome again to the first in the CoSA webinar series on leadership and management. And I hope you join us again for more on this topic as we go throughout the year. We've got more presentations throughout the year. We've got a full listing of the webinars available on the CoSA website. So if you're interested, go and check that out. Today we're going to be hearing from Christopher Barth, and then we're going to have time at the end for questions and answers. But again, feel free to type in your questions in the chat, and we'll get to those at the end. Also at the end, we're going to go over any upcoming announcements and any upcoming program as well. And so now I'd like to introduce you to Chris Barth, who is currently serving as Librarian and Associate Dean at the United States Military Academy at West Point, where he is responsible for coordinating library operations and strategic vision for academic information support. Mr. Barth also teaches as an adjunct instructor in the American History Division and chairs the Academy's Information Technology Strategy Committee. So I'd like to welcome Chris and turn it over to him.
Thank you very much. Welcome everyone. It is a privilege to be able to join you today and talk a little bit about leadership and management. West Point, leadership is important to West Point, and it's one of the reasons why I came here to work. And so the opportunity to talk about it and continue to learn about it myself is something that's very near and dear to my heart. A little bit more of an introduction for myself. I have a bachelor's in history from Kenyon College in Ohio, and then my master's degrees in history and library information science from the University of Wisconsin in Milwaukee. I have mostly worked in higher education, although I did start out my career as a librarian and archivist for the Anchorage Daily News. Up in Alaska, wonderful place to be. While I was there, I went to school for archives. I should start with that story a little bit. While I was a senior at Kenyon, I was a senior and had absolutely no idea what I wanted to do with my life. But I was a history major, and I was also lazy at the time. So I wanted to research something for my honors project that I would have good archival access to, right? That's what historians do. So I was doing a history of the college, spending a lot of time in the archives, and I still remember the day when all of a sudden it was like, wait, there are people who get paid to be in archives. That's not a bad thing. So I went to school with the dual degree program to go into archives. My first job as librarian in the Anchorage Daily News actually got to oversee the archives of the Anchorage Times, which was the first newspaper in Alaska. And the time scales in Alaska are different than other places. It's only been a state since the 50s. So, but that collection had materials back into the 30s and 40s from the history of Alaska, which was absolutely fantastic. A challenge doing it for a for-profit company, you all probably know, they're primarily interested in selling newspapers, right? Not necessarily preserving archives. But from there, I have worked in higher education at Kenyon College, where I worked as a frontline librarian and technology consultant, and also served as Director of Information Resources. I managed the Special Collections and Archives while at Kenyon. From there, I moved to Iowa and worked at Luther College as the Executive Director for Library and Information Services. That's a merged library and IT organization. Kenyon's was as well. You'll find that often at smaller liberal arts colleges where the information organization across the entire college is put together under one leader. And in many cases, that can result in some good synergy, I think. And then in 2011, I came to the U.S. Military Academy as Librarian Associate Dean. I also get to teach American history here as well. On my side biz, and the reason I'm actually here today is I do teach on the faculty for the Archives Leadership Institute. Hopefully many of you are familiar with this. It is funded by the NHPRC. I've been, this will be my 6th year on the faculty while it was at Luther briefly, and now is at Berea College in Kentucky. That's where I met Barbara a couple of years ago as she was working with ALI as well. So that's a fantastic opportunity, I know for me as a faculty member, to get to know a lot of archivists in the field and really build a great network. And then I'm also starting this summer, adjunct teaching with San Jose State University in their School of Information, looking at a course on workflow redesign and trying to rethink how we do what we do in libraries and archives and do it better. So that's my background. What I want to do real quick here is, pardon me while I switch over to my screen, because we're going to do some interactive things, hopefully. What you're going to hear from me today is part of what I do at ALI. It's a little piece of it. I don't know that I'm going to significantly rock anyone's world, but I hope I want to take the time to kind of call a little bit of, call out this thinking between leadership and management. Just have us think a little more intentionally about it. Real quickly, I will put in a plug for my employer, U.S. Military Academy Library there, a couple of photos. That's our mission. We're in a beautiful building right in the heart of West Point, looking right up the Hudson River, which, to be honest, on days like yesterday when we're having our Easter is not the best view, but on days like today when the sun is out, it is. Within the U.S. Military Academy, or I should say, one more slide here, we are ranked as one of the best college libraries in the country by the 2018 Princeton Review, currently number 5. We are proud of that. A lot of that has to do with the fact that we're relatively new with comfortable building and a great staff, and we work pretty hard to try to provide a wide range of support to our cadets, faculty, and staff. We do have the U.S. Military Academy Archives here, and we are one of 9 affiliated archives with NARA. We have Record Group 404, which, if you're an IT web person, is kind of a funny thing. I usually ask the archives crowd, you know, what does 404 stand for in the internet world? And of course, it means file not found, which we really hope does not apply to our record group, even though it is Record Group 404. But we do hold those records of the U.S. Military Academy here for the National Archives and work with them out of their city. We have recently redesigned our library actually to kind of center our entire program around our special collections and archives. We used to have that as a separate entity of about 7 people. We've got a staff of about 44, and they were responsible for all of those operations. We rebooted that and essentially have taken our entire collection staff now and involved them into the workflow for supporting special collections and archives. We now have more than half of our library staff working in special collections and archives. Special collections and archives is something that's important to me, and as you can imagine, we have some pretty fantastic collections here at the Academy, and so we really are trying to build a program to support the curriculum around the resources that we have. You can see a few of the statistics on the slide there. We do pretty much get about half of the student body every year in the Special Collections and Archives Reading Room for a variety of different course integrated programs that we do that primarily focus on our manuscript and our archival collections. West Point has a long history, and the people here who have attended here have done some pretty important things. And so there's a pretty high level of interest that we have, certainly even on the cadets, for understanding the history of the place where they are going to school. All right, so here's my goals for our talk this afternoon. Just to give you a little roadmap of where I would like us to go. We'll talk a little bit about leadership and define kind of what that means. I want to define what management means. Sometimes these things are used interchangeably, not always. I think we'll try to understand what the relationship is, so we'll talk about the differences and the connections between those two things. I'm going to encourage you to reflect on the balance of leadership and management in your current position. I think most people have to do that in some way. We all have some different strategies to do that, but I want to encourage us to take a moment and just think about that and make sure that we are seeking those opportunities to both lead and to manage, make time. And then encourage intentional development of well-balanced leaders for the future, right? This gets to what ALI does. It gets to what we do here at West Point, right? We are very interested in building leaders and in both modeling what it looks like to be a leader, but really challenging people to think critically about that. So first we're going to talk about what is leadership. And this is where I'm going to go off the rails a little bit here, and we're going to try to be interactive, even though this is me mostly talking to you via the web. But what I'm going to do is switch over, and a screen is going to pop up here. And I'm going to encourage you to pull up a device if you have a device. It can be a laptop, it can be your cell phone, it can be an iPad, whatever device you have, as long as you can get to the web. And you should see a URL at the top of the slide there that is poloev.com/USMA. And if you go to that URL, you should see a box where you can enter a response. And you can see that I'm asking you a question here. When you think of influential and successful leaders, who pops into your mind? And I have preceded the response there with George Washington, you can see. But I encourage you to go ahead and pull up the box and type in the name or as many names as you can think of influential and successful leaders. And then you can also upvote, or if you disagree with someone, you can downvote the names as they get populated onto the screen.
Chris, could you speak up a little bit?
I can, yes.
Thank you.
So we've got a few U.S. presidents showing up on the list there, right? A lot of U.S. presidents now, looks like. Roosevelt and Reagan, Obama, Lincoln, Washington. A couple Oprahs. We'll have to see if she joins the presidential list or not, right? Winston Churchill. Martin Luther King Jr., good. Gloria Steinem. So a number of different kind of leaders Certainly, we've got our U.S. President group. We have some influential women's rights advocates, right? Other international leaders. There's a West Point grad, Robert E. Lee, right? So in many cases, these are national or international level people. Largely, centered around politics in one way or another, or advocates for political rights. Okay, I'm going to give you about 30 more seconds. Anything else you want to add up there? You too. All right. Beyonce. Okay. We're getting into music here now, right? Okay, so what I want you to do is we've kind of gotten in our minds a little bit of this idea of some people who we see as influential and successful leaders. I'm going to flip the slide here, and your screens are all going to change, and you're going to get a new question. So what attributes make up a good leader? If you think of some of these names that we've just seen, what are some adjectives that you would throw out there that make you think that they are a good leader to describe them? And this is actually going to create a little word cloud for us as you type. This one tests my reading ability as the screen changes every few seconds. So someone with vision, but not only vision, someone with empathy, right? Who knows people, can communicate, shows courage, but able to make a decision, right? Be decisive. Honest, intelligent, caring, relatable. Self-aware. Tenacious, right? Someone who can take risk. Someone who is strong with strength. Someone who is humble. That's good. We're going to end on that note. A little foreshadowing from one of my last slides. Thick-skinned, able to stand up there at the front. All right. 10 more seconds. Anything else? So just take a look at the screen, or at what you can see on your screen. Some of these words, again, visionary, empathy, courage, communication, decisiveness. Um, in a lot of ways, we are writing the perfect job description for our boss here, right? You know, this is the person we want to have above us, who's going to embody all of these really good and important leadership skills and attributes. We are going to flip the script here a little bit. I'm going to move on, and we're going to talk about, and you can think in your mind what the difference between leadership and management is. But I'm asking the same question. When you think of an influential and a successful manager, who comes to your mind? Is this the same list? Maybe it is. Is it a different list of people when you think of someone who's a really good manager? Oh, there's a good one. My mom, right? Those are probably some of the more difficult things to manage, right? Kids and households. So far, by and large, a pretty different list, right? Indicative of we see these things as distinct skills in some way. Get some sports folks in there, right? Jeff Bezos has managed his way to the wealthiest man in the country now, right? I am sitting about 100 feet from a large statue of Dwight Eisenhower as he looks out over the plain here at the military academy. All right, another 30 seconds or so here. All right, so again, by and large, a different set of names that we've come up with, people who we see as good managers. Edwin Stanton, he's a Kenyon College grad, by the way. I just taught a lesson about him. And he hunkered down in his office while Johnson was threatening to get him out. Bill Belichick, hard to disagree, even though I live in New York. Hard to disagree that he's a good football coach. All right, I'm going to flip our slide over one more time here and then ask you what attributes make up a good manager. So thinking of a lot of those names and people you've just been thinking of, what are the adjectives that come to mind that kind of embody them? So we want someone with their act together, right? Someone who is organized, who can listen, be collaborative, communicator. That's a word we saw on our leadership slide. Someone who's knowledgeable and fair. Got to be able to multitask. See humble on there again. Someone who's pragmatic, someone who can get stuff done, knows what to do, right? efficient. Someone who can coach. But at the end of the day, it looks like we want someone who's going to be organized, who knows what they need to do and is able to actually find a way forward to get it done, right? But be collaborative and listen and be focused, not too scattered, right? All right, add any more last minute ones on there. Y'all have done a great job throwing some stuff out there. Take a moment to look at some of those words for management. What makes a good manager? All right, so now I want to kind of talk a little bit. I'm going to use a piece by Robert Sutton to talk a little bit about leading versus managing. And you'll see this slide here where he talks about bumping into this distinction, this leading versus managing, right? These two things we've just been talking about. And he references back to Warren Bennis, who's written a fair amount business literature, leadership literature, and a book that he wrote, Learning to Lead, a workbook on becoming a leader, where he says there's a profound difference between management and leadership, and both are important. To manage means to bring about or to accomplish, and I think we can see that in a lot of the words that we put forward. To have charge or responsibility for, to conduct, but leading is influencing, is guiding in a direction, course, action, opinion, and the distinction is crucial. And then he has this line, right? Managers are people who do things right, and leaders are people who do the right thing, right? And many of us have probably heard that or a version of that, that line. I'm going to flip over. So the manager and the leader, and Bennis actually comes up with this little list that I'm going to show you. He talks about the manager, he talks about the leader. And so in his words, just kind of watch these words go by, and then I'll have you think about them when we're done. So the manager administers, right? The leader innovates. The manager is a copy. The leader is an original. The manager maintains, the leader develops. Manager focuses on systems and structure, it's organized, right? The leader is focusing on people. The manager relies on control. Leader inspires trust. The manager has a short-range view. Leader has a long-range perspective. Manager asks how and when. The leader asks what and why. The manager has their eyes on the bottom line, while the leader has their eyes on the horizon. Manager imitates, leader originates. Manager accepts the status quo, leader challenges the status quo. Manager is a good soldier, leader is his or her own person. And the manager does things right, the leader does the right thing. So this is Bennis's list. I'll be honest, I have some issue with his list a little bit because it sounds like some of these words are a little negative on the side of the manager, in my opinion. When I think his point and what he's really trying to get at is the best leaders actually need to balance both of these things and find a way to balance. And that isn't always easy, but that's what we're going to talk about next. We always have to have a little Dilbert in here, right? So, but I like Dilbert's attitude here. You know, you're supposed to make superficial statements about how good the company is and hope something lucky happens and profits goes up. It's leadership. And with a wave of his hand, it just happens, right? We all probably have seen leaders who kind of work that way. And I'll be honest, my wife right now works in a location that has a leader that is very much like Dilbert in this cartoon. Fantastic visionary, actually. Comes up with some really great ideas, kind of waves the hand and just kind of expects the staff to figure it out with very little input from the leader. And it's really hard on the staff. And many of you probably have worked in similar places where you've got someone who's really actually good at leading but can't manage. Or you're the other way around, right? You're in a place that doesn't seem to be moving forward in the way that you think it should, but maybe the day-to-day operations work out okay. So Sutton, in his article, kind of puts forward this consideration between leadership and management, not rejecting that there is a difference, but there in the middle of the slide, thinking about the fact that to do the right thing, a leader needs to understand what it takes to do things right and to make sure they actually get done, right? They need to be organized, they need to be efficient. And if you glorify one, leadership and management too little, which is kind of what Bennis was doing in that list, I think, but there's a risk of failing to act and not being able to move forward. And in some cases, as you all know, if you work in a Fortune 500 company, maybe you can afford to have that leader who is out there in the front, just tossing out fantastic ideas with that great vision, knowing where the organization needs to be. And underneath that person, you've got a good team of managers who are there, who are able to pick up those ideas and can instantly translate them into plans and move it forward and get it done. My experience of archives is generally we're not staffed to that level, and so our leaders really do need to be those managers too. You've got to find that balance to think about not only where you need to be, but also how you're going to get there. And it's to our peril if we go one way or the other in many cases. All right, one more participation opportunity for you. Just a quick poll. When you think of yourself, do you consider yourself to be more of a leader or a manager? You can just click the button on the screen there again at pollab.com/USMA. This is getting very exciting now as we're close to 50-50 there, right? The leaders are coming on strong here at the end. So we're actually pretty evenly split here relatively, right? 60-40 leader, manager. All right. Any more votes? When I do this before, the breakout often comes out about like this. It's usually within 10-15% of a break even in terms of which side people generally will fall on. I very purposely don't have a both or a neither. I think it's good to, leaders are decisive, right? You got to pick one or the other, go one way or the other. So here's our challenge, and this is kind of where I wanted to land this. How can you work as you think about the importance of leadership and that importance of all of those words that we saw in our word cloud, the collaborative vision, the empathetic, being the empathetic leader. How can you work to kind of pull that out more in the work that you do? And how can you work to balance management in with that too, that organization piece, that ability to be efficient? And how can you develop well-balanced staff, right, to be able to do that? Here I was going to talk a little bit about my answer to that question because I've struggled with this at various points in my career about how to manage leadership and management. It's not always easy. And there are a lot of variables depending upon how many people you may supervise, the overall size of your team, exactly what your duties are. But I know when it comes to balancing leadership for me, part of what it means to be a leader in my mind is really being intentional about exposing myself to new ideas. It's hard to come up with an effective and a rigorous vision if you aren't out there kind of rubbing up against things that either are new or in some cases may make you uncomfortable professionally or kind of challenging yourself in that way. And so my answer to that, how I try to pursue that is one way certainly through reading and setting aside dedicated time to be able to keep current in the profession, and not only in the profession of libraries and archives, but in the professions of technology and social media and government and politics and military, for me, a lot of those sorts of fields. But that's very easy to fall by the wayside, as we all know, right, to keep up with those sorts of things. But when it comes time to leadership, to making sure that you're pursuing that, I think that's critical. I do that right now in my calendar. I actually take 2 days a week, usually Mondays and Fridays, and they are blocked off on my calendar completely. No one can book any time on those days. Now, am I successful at always keeping those 2 days clear? No, I am not. But it gives me a starting place, at least, to say these days are days when I can either do reading, I can sit and do some deeper thinking about vision and about the direction in which we need to be moving as an organization. Without carving out that time, for years I did not do that. Those bigger picture thoughts, when they happened, might have been in the shower, but only for 10 minutes, and then they're gone because I'm running out the door, or maybe on a drive to work or something like that. There was not a good regular way for them to happen. It's been much easier for me now that I've kind of separated that time. Now, there is a flip side to that, and that is right now I've got 5 days of work that happen in 3. So my other 3 days are pretty darn busy. There are a lot of meetings, but I consider that my management time, right? I make an effort to meet with all of my direct reports every week, not for a very long period of time, and that time can vary based on what their needs are, but I let them drive those agendas. That's not me coming to them with a long list of things I need for them to be doing. It's me finding out where they are and the sorts of things that I can be doing to help them succeed. I spend a lot of my management time then kind of doing those sorts of things during those other days of the week. So that's, in time management, that's one way that I have tried to work to find that better balance. And then modeling that for the staff. I encourage the staff to do the same thing. I know there are some workplaces that will actually set quiet hours or some periods of time when people can get work done, essentially, right, when people aren't calling all the time. We've never done that, and I don't know that that's the right thing to do in a library, right? We quiet hours all the time, some people would say, but we know that's not true. But there is something that's really important, I think, about encouraging staff to feel free to find what is right for them. There certainly are many ways to accomplish that. I said I would kind of wrap up with a quote about humility. This is a West Point grad, Dwight Eisenhower, obviously famous for doing all sorts of things. But leadership consists of nothing but taking responsibility for everything that goes wrong and giving your subordinates credit for everything that goes right and or goes well. And I think that's a good approach to leadership, and that humility piece that we pulled out in some of the attributes for a leader. So again, my goals here in about 30 little more minutes to define leadership, right? Talk about what that means, and hopefully to help you, have you help me define leadership. You did a great job. Talk about management. Talk about those differences as we saw in those word clouds, right, between the two. Encourage you to think about the balance of leadership and management in the work that you're doing right now, and think about how you can develop well-balanced leaders. And again, this is, probably not new for any of you. My hope is just that this little moment of this webinar kind of gets you to think about it a little more intentionally, to think about that balance in what you do, and try to find ways to make sure that you are meeting both the leadership and the management parts of the work that you do. So I am going to wrap there, and also going to flip my screen back. And we'll open it up for questions.
Thanks, Chris. That was very informative. I got quite a bit out of that. If anybody has any questions, please go ahead and type those in chat so that we can answer those questions. Give you a couple minutes. I know it usually takes a little time to ponder and think about your question and then actually get it typed into chat. So we'll give you a couple minutes to get that done. I didn't see any that came in during the presentation, but Becky, were there any that came in? Or Becky or Mary, did you see any that came in?
I haven't seen any come in yet either.
Okay. Chris, you said, I have a question. You said that you had been participating in ALI as part of, with leadership. Did you have any, input or for the attendees here or questions that came up there at ALI or takeaways from that as far as, what those attendees at, at that level were learning about leadership and management?
I think a lot of the, in this piece of what I talk about, there's a sense by a lot of the attendees that they spend a lot of time managing, that their responsibilities tend to be very management focused, and that there's always something in their daily work that is pulling their vision down, right? And so a lot of the conversation tends to be about go-to strategies of how do you carve out that time? How do you make sure that you can be a leader and be an effective leader and really have a good vision and then be able to sell that vision right with staff when there is so much else that has to be done, right? And that's a hard challenge in many ways and in many contexts. It's the sort of thing that, coming from merged library and IT organizations, that we kind of talk about it in that sense of, there's always an IT crisis, right? We all know that there's always an IT crisis going on, but how many times are there library archives crises? It's often our collection development, those sorts of things. It's less. So how do you make sure that you spend your time doing those things?
Okay, I don't know if you can see these, Chris. I guess I don't know if you can or not, but we had a couple of questions that came into chat. Let's see. From Barbara, we have, how do you balance things that are urgent and important with your need to improve and revitalize?
Yeah. Yeah, and that's where, even the best of times, setting aside time for the deeper thinking, that time gets lost sometimes. I'll tell you, I used to only set aside 1 day a week as kind of the more focused work time. Over time, I got to the point where I was setting aside 2 because I knew that some of that time is going to get eaten away because there are urgent crises. So I think my answer would be is to try to engineer, if it's a time thing, try to engineer some time over and above and beyond what you think you might need, because you can always give some back. But it's really hard to, if you don't set it aside, you're not going to be able to use it. So I think that's one way I've tried to do that, because there are those crises that do come up. And put it on your to-do list, professional development, professional reading, those sorts of things. Those are, in my opinion, just as important as a lot of the other things that we do. So maybe belong on the to-do list instead of just in the back of your mind.
The next one, it says, is good leadership conditional upon having a good cause? Some of the world's most effective leaders have had atrocious causes.
They certainly have, and I think my answer is no. I often ask, so I teach American history, and I ask the cadets that I teach, for examples of good leaders, and very rarely does one person throw out Adolf Hitler, right? Atrocious man. But what an effective leader. I mean, he commanded the will of a nation in a way that few other leaders have done. And so I do not recommend him as a leader nor his causes at all. But in terms of leaders, you're absolutely right. Some of the world's most effective leaders have been able to champion some things that we would certainly not wish that they would have championed. So no, I don't think it's conditional upon that. I think a lot of those attributes we talked about can apply to good and to evil.
The next one, it says, what strategies do you recommend for encouraging the development of leaders in the workplace?
Yeah, and I see that one and the one about subordinates thinking like leaders. And for our organization, we went through a reorg a couple of years ago, which is where we kind of reoriented everything around special collections and archives again. And in that, we actually made everybody in the organization a leader. It doesn't matter where you are on the org chart, whether you're an associate director or you are a technician who works at our circulation desk or does digitization in our archives. We named you on the org chart as a leader in the area in which you are working. And to that extent, then, for the management, we've tried to give everyone that autonomy and that responsibility then for making sure that that part of the organization runs, which is a very kind of coaching leadership model through the organization, very developmental in that way. And so that's how we've approached it, is to really make everybody a leader so that it's part of what their performance appraisals are actually grading them on. And that's true even of our lowest level on the org chart. You know, that their leadership skills are part of what we're evaluating for their position.
Thanks for jumping in. I see I missed that question there, so I'm glad you caught that one. And then the only other one I see listed there is, how does this impact increasing workloads and decreasing resources paradigm?
I mean, it gets harder, right? I think leadership for me is a very intellectually expensive thing. And it does take resource. Not only intellectually, but it takes time, and it takes energy and effort and focus and all of those things to be able to kind of do those pre-connections and synthesis of what you're seeing in the world and thinking about the work that you're doing and trying to come up with that vision. And so it does impact when we have decreasing resources. If you have organizations that are losing people, you know, that really comes back to thinking pretty critically about the areas where you are spending your time and recognizing that increasingly there may be a place where we have to say no. This isn't something that we can do. This isn't a service that we can support. Because there is an equation there where decreasing resources is really going to push workloads to a point where everything can't be done in the same way that it once was. That's hard, certainly. I do know, you know, the rest of what I teach at ALI kind of focuses on this a little bit. I teach a morning session that looks at strategic visioning. And we use that time really in the space of about 2.5 hours with the ALI cohort. We come up with a complete vision for the future of archival service. And we use Poll Everywhere, which is the product we use today to kind of brainstorm and gather data. And so there are some ways, I think, that you can be efficient. You can be a good manager in terms of trying to connect with staff, to encourage their leadership, to try to recognize that people don't have a whole lot of time to go away for a strategic planning retreat necessarily for 3 days. But you can probably find 3 hours, and there are some techniques and tools that you can use to really actually come up with a solid core of shared understanding and vision from across the staff, which, you know, as soon as you've got your staff buying into the vision that you have, it's going to be way easier to actually realize that vision versus you kind of disappearing into the black box and coming back and, this is the direction we're going to go.
Okay, thanks. That was good. That was quite a few questions. I didn't miss any, did I, Becky?
I don't think so. I think you got them all.
Good. Okay, unless we have anything else coming in, I'm going to turn it over to Mary Margaret.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Shelley. This was fascinating presentation on leadership and management. I have just a few announcements and reminders before we conclude the webinar for today. Let's see if we got the next slide to move forward here. We're getting a little closer to August. Now we've gotten to spring, so we're busy planning the joint annual meeting with NAGARA and SAA. And as noted on the slide, Archives on the Hill, an Advocacy Day events jointly sponsored by CoSA, NAGARA, SAA, and the Regional Archival Associations Consortium will be held on August 14th. More information will be available as that approaches. CoSA will hold its work session and an all-day meeting with staff of certain program areas within the National Archives on August 15th. We're looking forward to Great Idea Exchange Day, and we'll be sharing more information as we continue to plan this event with NARA staff. The business meeting and awards dinner is also scheduled on August 15th. The next day, August 16th, at the plenary session, there's an awards ceremony, and there also will be a silent auction that day. Okay, I want to talk about our upcoming webinars. Mark your 2018 calendars, the fourth Thursday of the month at 3 p.m. Eastern to continue our 2018 webinar series. Next month in April, we will focus on advocacy. In May, June, July, September, and October, the member webinars will continue to focus on CoSA's 2018 theme of leadership and management. Be sure to visit the CoSA website to pre-register for all the webinars. And remember, there was a question about slides, and we have an answer here on the website. The past and future webinars, this webinar today as well, are available as recordings on CoSA's YouTube channel. And we have April 26th listed there, May 24th, June 28th, July 26th. And the CoSA mid-year board meeting will occur in Washington, D.C. on April 8th through 10th. The CoSA Awards Program. May 1st deadline for the awards that are listed there. These awards are sponsored by Family Search. This is the Victoria Irons Walsh Leadership Award, the Victoria Irons Walsh Travel Stipend for State Archives staff, the Advocacy for Archives Awards, Rising Stars, and the CoSA NHPRC Shrab Award of Merit. So keep those in mind, and the deadline is May 1st. As always, thanks to our sponsors, Ancestry, Family Search, Apex Software, Preservica, LibNova, Gayward Archival, and SpaceSaver, and our federal funders, NHPRC, the National Historical Publications and Records Commission, and IMLS, the Institute of Museum and Library Services. I want to remind you there's several ways to stay connected with CoSA and with other state archives. We'd love to hear from you through social media, the website, email, whichever works for you. Thanks again for attending our member webinar today. Please take just a few more minutes out of your day to help us evaluate today's webinar. Give us feedback on future webinar topics. We seek to continuously improve our webinar offerings, and your responses are very helpful to us. Thanks again to our speaker today, Chris Barth, our moderator, Shelley Thompson, for an outstanding webinar, and to all of you for all your questions. Please do complete the evaluation. Thanks so much for joining us today, and we'll say goodbye.